You're listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host.
And as I foreshadowed in the last podcast, in this one we're going to delve into a topic that touches the core of modern society's values. So one of the things that brings a lot of men and boys these days as well to coming to see me is their anxiety about fundamentally not becoming wealthy enough or successful enough to be, in a sense, accepted in society. So what am I talking about? Well, fundamentally in the framework of making good men great, one of the values is acquisition. So we go from territory to hierarchy to acquisition. So, fundamentally, what's acquisition about? Well, essentially, it's about our chase for wealth, power, and prestige, and these days through social media, popularity. But you've got to ask yourself, what's this going to cost you? Right now, I can tell you that in my practice, the cost is really high. People feeling depressed, anxious. It's again a good argument that neither anxiety nor depression need to have a genetic component. It's a response by the individual to the environment and their interpretation of what their relationship to the environment's about. So what I want to do is I want to explore a more fulfilling path ultimately to this idea of what success is, but we need to redefine that whole notion of success. So join me as we challenge the norms and redefine what leading a successful life really means. And keep in mind, I'm not talking about a garage full of Maseratis, Lamborghinis, and Bugattis, or a 75-meter yacht. So let's unpack the acquisitional mindset. That mindset fundamentally is deeply ingrained in patriarchal masculinity. So it equates success with material gain, power, prestige, and popularity. We can see this is one of the foundations essentially in the political pathway. It shouldn't be, but it is. Those of you who've watched Nemesis can see this played out absolutely to a T. I couldn't have scripted the rubbish better. So historically, in this mindset, the male especially has been able to assert dominance. Now, that dominance often comes at the expense of emotional connections and personal fulfillment, but also, in many instances, at the cost of lives. Think about what Putin's doing. He's not doing it for the good of the Russian people. This is killing a whole generation of men. This insistence of throwing young men and older men into the meat grinder in the Ukraine simply for some disturbed psychological reason. So in this context, Alain de Botton, who's a Swiss-British philosopher, came up and popularized the term status anxiety. Now, he wrote a whole book on the thing, and it's simply called Status Anxiety. It was published in 2004. In that book, de Botton explores the idea of status anxiety as a widespread concern and a source of considerable distress in contemporary society. He defines it as the worry so many people experience over what others think of them, whether they are judged a success or a failure, a winner or a loser. And remember, this is classic patriarchal thinking. It's binary. You either made it or you haven't. So let's talk a little bit about the origin and the explanation of this particular concept. So status anxiety arises from the desire to be respected and valued by others. But for some people, this essentially becomes almost a pathological pursuit. I say pathological because they're obsessed with it and they're compulsive about, getting what it is that they want. Now, it's not a new phenomenon. It's been present in various forms throughout history. However, and I agree with this, de Botton argues that the condition has intensified in modern times due to the democratization of expectations. So what does that mean? Well, basically, we're telling people they can be and do whatever it is that they want under all conditions. And, certainly there's some truth to that, but there are also some limitations. Now, limitations exist within the system to protect the territories of certain interest groups, certain lobby groups. And there's a whole proliferation of opportunities, for comparison, thanks to the media and the internet. We can go through all sorts of stuff. I mean, the internet with the influencer thing is particularly an interesting and fertile ground for the origin, if you're vulnerable to it, of your own status anxiety. So what's its impact? Well, the impact is quite profound. It affects individuals' well-being, their social relationships, and social cohesion. This success orientation through the status anxiety has actually divided our community. In Australia, one of the things that's particularly prevalent is a preoccupation with the ownership of property. And there's become a sort of, attitude that if you don't own property, there must be something wrong with you and you're somehow inferior to those who do. Now, a lot of people would argue this and go, oh, no, it's rubbish. Australia is not a classist society. But I beg to differ. Why is it that people send their children to private schools, especially elite private schools? Well, the research tells us that there's not exactly a massive amount of difference between, the success rate between private and public school students. In fact, in some cases, the public school students do better. There's certainly evidence that they stay at university initially better than private school students. And in my experience, a lot of private school students drop out fairly quickly, unfortunately, because some of them are actually really very intelligent. But nonetheless, having two education systems, one which is heavily funded publicly and through the public purse, but also privately with massive investments, gives them resources that the public school student has never had the opportunity to access. And so the other element that's absolutely critical in this is the social network that is established in a private school that fundamentally opens doors. So there is this feedback loop in our society, basically towards this, status system. And if you're not participating, you're anxious about it. Or if you're feeling like you're locked out or you don't match up. So a lot of this stuff, is then acted out in our drive towards the right education, careers, relationships, and lifestyles that we believe are going to earn us the respect and admiration of others. If I'm not successful, I won't be loved. I'll be rejected and abandoned. These are core fears that many, many people have. So if you're already anxious about being accepted, right, because there's been some damage or some trauma to your, ego as you were growing up, then this is going to absolutely amplify. This is like a steroid. It's going to dial the anxiety right up. So it begs the question: what do we do about it? So what do we do to mitigate the effects of this green monster status anxiety? It also acts out in a sense of jealousy and envy often, which leads people to do at times some pretty horrendous stuff. Well, this is where de Botton proposes several solutions. Part of which is pursuing, understanding and educating yourself in philosophy, in art, in politics, in religion. And why does he suggest that? Well, these things offer a perspective that can help us and all the individuals find relief from the pressures of social judgment. Now, it's interesting too, because, one of the things that I experienced going into university and where I did a double major in psychology and philosophy. And at one stage was very, very drawn to, committing myself to philosophy as my main major, that I was going to pursue a course, a professional course. But the message that I got from almost everybody that I spoke to about this, other than academia, because they were going, go for it, was that who's going to give you a job as a philosopher? There's no money in this. You're going to starve. And, unfortunately, as a very, very young man, I had two flaws. One is because I was an only child, the idea of actually asking people, for help and support and mentoring seemed to be an alien concept to me. It never really crossed my mind to go, is this really true? Right. And if I had have, I would have probably found out very quickly that it's not true. For a start, I could have committed myself to an academic career. Now, that has its drawbacks too. And don't get me wrong, I don't regret the path that I chose, because in many respects, psychology and philosophy are interactive. They allow myself to have a much broader understanding of lots and lots of different issues, including ethics, morality, the understanding of science from a philosophical point of view. So, you know, and unfortunately, that level of education in the last 40 years has shrunk because universities, in a sense, have become, a meal ticket to a career. And what are we seeing? We're seeing people going to law, medicine, and don't get me wrong, not belittling any of that. After having two major surgeries, I can tell you I'd rather have more doctors than fewer doctors. Now, some people might argue that that's not necessarily the case with lawyers, but we still need them, okay? But what I'm saying is that the other areas of commerce, economics, and business, and they are very, very much based on the idea that this is something you do to get you into a particular corporate career. And I've got nothing against that. We're always going to have corporations and so on. But my view, having seen, MBAs and, looking at commerce and economics, is that we need actually to embed in those aspects of philosophy and aspects of psychology. Because after all, what is economics? It's the relationship between individuals and groups of individuals and, the exchange of stuff of value, to keep it simple. Okay. An economist is probably going to shoot me down on this, but I'm going to stick with that argument for the time being. So, as a result of our exposure to philosophy, art, politics, religion, psychology, Beton encourages us to take a reflective position on what really matters in life. And like myself, he advocates for values. such as kindness, love, and community over the conventional markers of success, which is, as we said, wealth, power, prestige, and fame, or, popularity. Now, it certainly works if you're going to go into politics, but I venture to say that politicians at the end of the day often will say, well, did the best I could. Was it really fulfilling? Probably not. Some of them actually come out of it with a lot of money, a lot more than what they started out with. So, unfortunately, this whole thing absolutely breeds a culture of toxic competition, a sense of isolation, and never, ever feeling quite enough. And the psychological toll is massive anxiety, depression, and a chronic sense of dissatisfaction. So, one of the other aspects to this is that it breeds perfectionism. Underlying perfectionism is always anxiety, the fear of not being good enough. Now, I've got to say that, currently, in the last probably 15, 20 years, there's been a push, a growing push, and movements and thought leaders across the globe that are advocating for a shift. I'm one of those. I'm urging you to find balance and to seek, a sense of satisfaction in the journey itself, not just the destination, not just the big fat bank account. Because again, as they say, are you going to be the wealthiest man in the graveyard? What's that going to do for anybody, let alone for you? So let me invite you to join me in a small reflective exercise. I want you to think about the moments when you feel truly successful. And remember, in this instance, it needs to be an authentic sense of achievement. What were you doing? Who were you with? Now, chances are that a lot of these memories involve moments of connection and achievement not tied to any particular material gain or personal breakthroughs. Okay? Now, consider how you can incorporate more of these fulfilling experiences into your daily life. What small changes can you make to shift away from the acquisition focused mindset and move towards one that values your growth, your connections, and most of all, your well-being? So as we wrap today's discussion, remember that redefining success is a personal and ongoing journey. Throughout our life, we will have different points that require different tasks that relate to how we are successful. But it is definitely about questioning social norms and aligning your life with your values that truly matter to you. What is it that you feel will fulfill you more than what you're doing? Now, the last part of it is, as always, I want to encourage you to share your reflections and actions that you plan to take after today's episode. Let's inspire each other to embrace a broader, more fulfilling definition of success. If your son or your daughter doesn't want to go to university, that does not mean they're a failure. I know lots of people who never set foot in that institution and they're highly successful. But if they're busting to go and they're busting to do an arts course as opposed to a commerce course, let them do it. Support them in doing that. Support them in allowing themselves to be educated. And, it's not just broad, it's also deep. A lot of us are suffering from, Excel spreadsheet fatigue in our community. And I see it all the time. And certainly working with the elderly, I really never had an old person on their deathbed say to me, I should have made more money. Most of the time they go, I really regret not spending time with the ones that I loved. Now, just on a quick note, please join me on Inspired Change with Gunter for an exciting conversation with Elizabeth Jane, author of Free and First, Unlocking Your Ultimate Life. We'll explore personal growth, empowerment, sharing strategies for breaking free from the social norms to unlock your true potential. So don't miss out on this journey of inspiration and empowerment. Tune in to unlock your ultimate life with us. So until next time, this is me signing off, and take care. Spread the word. Be good.
Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.guntersvoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda@noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at NOIRTAINMENT.com.